I'm introducing you again to AI Anna, the diversity series. I've got a really exciting guest on today and really excited to talk in a bit more detail about her journey and her career path, because I think it's not only inspirational, but it's really interesting just to find out more about that. Without further ado, I am introducing Yue Wang, who is the Senior Technology Manager at Samsung UK, working on network AI and 5G. So a really new and exciting area. So I can't wait to find out a bit more about that. Just to give a bit of an overview about the current state of play with diversity and inclusion, and this is according to diversityintech.co.uk, you can kind of demonstrate commitment, and this is really important to companies hiring. How you can kind of encourage that D&I within your workforce is to be open about gender pay inequality and equality, be aware of unconscious bias, acknowledge religious and cultural holidays, which I thought was a really important something I hadn't thought of before. Encourage frequent employee feedback, and to be aware of ageism and strive for a multi-generational workforce. So all really interesting points, and a few of those that I haven't really thought about. We'll be talking a bit today about why are we not diverse in technology, what is the impact on the industry, and what is the solution. But with all that being said, it would be great to find out a bit more about our guest today, and I can stop talking. And so if you could introduce yourself, Yue, and just tell me a bit more about your position and what you've been up to most recently.
Sure, thanks, Anna. I'm a Senior Technology Manager and a Network AI Lead at Samsung Research UK. We use AI for optimization and management for 5G and beyond networks. This is what we call the network AI research and development. So the research bit is to understand and to some extent to influence the industry trend, generate ideas, concepts, use cases, papers, patterns, standard contributions. And then on the development bit is where we need to put our ideas into reality, from getting and processing the right data to designing and integrating the AI models into the realistic scenarios. And then you probably spend a super long time training the models and then be able to actually validate it and demonstrate it. We do in-house projects, for example, collaborate with our headquarters, and also work on third-party projects with external partners, universities, industry partners. Yeah, so a variety of work, and never get bored.
Yeah, does not sound boring at all. I mean, just out of curiosity, how did you get into that more specific area? What kind of encouraged you to, because there's so many areas I'm sure you could have gone into as you progressed through your career. So what made it really interesting about where you're working right now? And why did you find that kind of the right path for you?
I guess the path kind of came naturally. I have always been interested in technology and engineering. So I started my career as a PhD working on the physical layer of the network. So if you know, this is the lowest layer of the network protocol. And then I gradually broadened my area to the higher layers and network. I guess 3 to 5 years ago, I started to find this fascinating area where you can apply AI to the network operation and management. I'm just so convinced this is a way to go. This is where you can simplify the network operation and save a great deal of network operational cost. And then I started to look into it and gradually start to build my own skill set, and very excitingly being able to formulate a team to work on some of the really interesting stuff, not only just to understand the concept, but also being able to actually put it into a practical scenario and simulation. I think that is the really motivating bit in my work. I find it really fascinating.
And have you had kind of many people kind of follow suit with you that you've known about, or do you, because obviously I'm sure you network a lot with, people from your PhD and previous positions, but have you had a lot of people kind of follow suit with your specific area of research and development, or have you found it still been quite a niche area amongst your kind of fellow network and friends?
Right. I would say 3 to 5 years ago, it is a quite new area. It needs a combination of the skills of knowing the network, knowing AI, and all the developed type of skills where you need to actually put the models into the realistic scenario. It does need a quite unique skill set to make it happen. But I do see more and more people are starting to working in this area and are starting to generate practical solutions to put it in the network. And I think this area is growing really fast. I do see AI will become inherent in the network everywhere in the different network domains and for different purposes of the network operations.
Absolutely. So just, I guess, taking it back a couple of steps and just thinking about how this career came about and potentially thinking about school days and where did this all begin for you? So what made you choose this path originally when you would have had so many different options ahead of you? What kind of influenced that decision, I guess, for you?
I guess one of the reasons is because I came from China. The STEM subjects were very popular at the time when I was in China, and also now still are very popular in China. So it wasn't a hard choice at all. I've been encouraged by my parents and friends of my parents, basically anyway, talking about the good things about working in this industry. And then I guess what I like about working in this industry and what has motivated me to stay long enough is that there is always new things to learn and to explore. So I talked about, when I started with the physical layer and gradually broadened my areas to the higher layer and the core network and AI. Another motivation of working in this industry is it also means you always have the opportunity to take part in shaping new technologies and make an impact. So now, for example, everyone is talking about AI networks, right? And there are lots of activities ongoing. But 3 to 4 years ago, when we try to put AI in the network, we do get a lot of questions around, why do you want to use AI? What is the benefit? The bottom line question is always, why would anyone invest on that? So I had to put a lot of groundwork to develop example solutions to solve the data, to show the benefit and the potential, and then interact with people internally and externally to champion that topic, and then to finally build a team, secure the funds, to working on something really interesting. So I think the journey like this is really rewarding, and it's a fascinating journey for me, really. It's like growing a tree when you plant a seed and then gradually see it grow, that sort of satisfaction. And from this process, you are making an impact, which would seem to be something I would never be able to do when I first entered the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's so interesting as well, because a lot of the people I speak to within the industry, they love that you get to see the end-to-end process. So particularly, like, you can start on a single idea and then you see it go out as a product, and that is so fulfilling. And you really can walk away and think, oh my goodness, that was me and my team. We really, what we see right now that was just an idea at first. So I think that's really exciting. And I also think it's so interesting what you mentioned about being from China, because I don't know if you notice, maybe when you're hiring in this country now, we just don't encourage it. It's especially, I would say, for females. It is very much kind of, when I was taking my A levels, for example, and I have mentioned it before, it was very much a very female dominated classroom for literature, history, those sorts of art based subjects. And then in the sort of more science based subjects, you would tend to see probably more male heavy classrooms. And so because it wasn't STEM, computer science, or because it wasn't, maybe just in my school, it wasn't such a big area of focus. It just wasn't a consideration for me. And I think that is why when we hire, I think the UK reaches out to lots of different countries across the world because of the setup it being very different and slightly more diverse, really, with its candidate base. So I think that's why it's so important for us and so, you know, inherent for us to, you know, look outside of the UK talent as well and really encourage people to kind of bring these incredible ideas that we wouldn't have otherwise. So I think that's a really interesting point, and I think that will be something that we'll start to look at hopefully, and how we can start to, you know, diversify talent in the classroom, because that's where it all does begin, and that's where it began for you. And you do see a lot of people in AI. I always see everyone going to, I think it's very project and motivation heavy. People will almost go anywhere so that they can really get involved in that PhD and make sure they really integrate themselves into it, because the passion of individuals like yourself is what really makes that decision. So that's really interesting. And yeah, and I guess talking about sort of any challenges that you may have overcome, because obviously being in, you know, the stats do show every team is different, but generally speaking, it is a male dominated industry in the UK. So what are the sort of challenges that you've had to overcome? I mean, without going into too much depth, I guess, what is the sort of struggles that you found just working in this industry and maybe being the sort of outsider as such?
I guess I can talk about some of the general challenges, you know, for someone who happens to be a woman and also come from a different culture background. And on the culture side, I have this story I like to tell all the time. And so I remember there was once a time I was sent to a management course. So the course instructor used the characters in Winnie the Pooh. You know, Rabbit is a person who has good skills, but probably not a team player. Piglet is the one who is a bit timid and needs encouragement from the management. That was basically what the course was about. You know, I can imagine all these characters must be so familiar to someone who is from a Western culture. You know, the course instructor doesn't need to explain it at all. But I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. And at that time, I was relatively junior. You know, I didn't dare to ask a question because everyone else seems to be so happy. And then sometime later, you know, I was reading this bedtime story to my daughter, and of course, one of the books was Winnie the Pooh story, and that's when I realized that was what he was talking about. Things like this can actually happen quite often in workplace for people who come from a different culture background. Even though they are well educated, they could still sometimes, you know, not have the enough culture context in order to understand some of the conversations. I think this can sometimes make people shy away from discussions and discourage them from contributing their ideas. Well, come to think about it, it didn't need to be that hard, right? I mean, all we need is a small print with some of the background of the story, and then we'll be able to understand it quite well. Same apply to the gender challenges as well. There are lots of examples of the unconscious bias. The one I particularly like is that there are studies show that 70% of the men are less willing to accept a criticism from a woman. So if some feedback is from a woman, men are more likely to dismiss it, think it's inaccurate. So think about how this would impact the challenge, for example, a woman face in their day-to-day work. All we need is a bit of awareness. So for example, next time if we hear someone expressing a different opinion and we feel like that we didn't like it, maybe we could just step back, and pause for a second and think about it. Is the idea that you didn't like, or is it because it's from a woman? I mean, workplace challenges are different. You know, whether I guess you're a man, woman, British, or Chinese, you would always be facing some sort of challenge in your day-to-day work, although the challenge would be different. I think it's important to build this culture in the team or in the company where we need to try to think about things from a different perspective, you know, another gender's perspective, another culture's perspective, or another individual's perspective, really. When you making a judgment, looking to reach agreement, negotiating a project, try to understand things from that different perspective. And I think that that goes a long way, regardless which gender or cultural background you come from.
That's so interesting, and I didn't know that stat, but it does make sense. And also that story about Winnie the Pooh, I just, you know, stupidly I thought, you know, and that's what people think. Everyone knows who Winnie the Pooh is, but not everyone knows who he is. And so a big yellow bear with a tiny t-shirt on, a tiny red t-shirt on, you're like, who is that? What is this supposed to be about? So that's so interesting. I think from my experience, obviously, just talking about recruitment, that is a really male dominated industry as well. Particularly agency style recruitment. Internal recruitment kind of looks like it's changing more and more, which is exciting. But I did have a colleague who's now one of my best friends who is German, and just working your head around, you know, what could be offensive or perceived offensive in a different country, just stuff like this, because I think as British people, we have a very unique humor. And we just kind of, we're very open about what we say, and sometimes it's very easy to forget that, you know, not all cultures, not all countries work this way. So, you know, I think what I've found is if you don't know, just ask, because if you ask with, you know, as long as it's not too overstepping, then at least you know, and you can kind of work around the topic to make everyone feel comfortable. And I think that's, and I think most of the time, and as long as your question, like we mentioned, isn't too you know, too rude or has some judgment attached to it, as long as you show that openness, people will often be open back, and then you can navigate a really strong team who has that trust with each other. So quite similar to what you mentioned with like perception is everything. And if we can just step outside of our own shoes and just start to think about how could that make someone else feel, you know, the only thing you can do is win from that, because everyone starts to kind of open their mind a bit. So I guess it's a very different industry, recruitment to tech, but I think those diversity issues are very similar. And I manage a team, a male and a female, and we just, how we interact is really different, but it's just to make sure that, you know, are you comfortable with me saying this? How would you like me to go about this? What is your preferred way of kind of questioning and criticism? And just working around that, because everyone's different, you know, everyone, all females are different as well, all males. Yeah, I can't get over that story. I'm going to think about that all day, the Winnie I can't believe that. That would have been so bizarre if you have no context to that. So I feel so bad for you, like just watching, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was years ago.
Yes. Now you know. But yeah, that's super interesting. But I think what's great about all those challenges that you've come up against is you've come up against these challenges and you've gotten over them and you've found solutions. And I think people in tech, you're very solution-based people, so you will find a good outcome in the end, and that's, yeah, maybe that's where it is. But what are you finding in the industry at the moment with talent, and do you have any kind of wise words, I guess, for someone who may be from a background that's less suited to tech, or just wouldn't naturally consider tech as a career path? Would you have anything that you would find, or any advice you would give?
I think one of the things we need to know is that outnumbered does not mean you're not welcome. Yes, it's a male-dominated industry. When you first enter the industry, you would like to see, for example, if you're a woman, you would want to see more women in the group. It's just natural. From my experience, every workplace I have been, majority of the people are very professional, very supportive, and they like to make you feel welcome. Another piece of advice, probably specific to women, is that it is also important to be yourself. Because you are the minority and you want to fit in, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change who you are. I mean, hey, like to try, for example, to make yourself an alpha woman or be super nice to everyone. Over time, you might grow confidence and you might change the way you do things, but it must come naturally from you. At the end of the day, I think in the professional world, you gain respect with your expertise, your skills, your knowledge, and how you respect others, regardless if you're man or woman.
That's such good advice. That last point there, I think is so important. And I think, I mean, I read Hillary Clinton's biography after she lost the election, and the reason this really rings true to me is because she basically within that election was being trained on how she spoke, what sort of terminology she used in her speeches. And I think the issue here is, I think if you lead a team, for example, or you want to be respected, you sometimes start to take on different characteristics and can be quite bullish with your behavior, because you think, if I want to be respected, I have to act like a man to be respected. And that's not the case at all. You have to be yourself. And there's that whole thing, if I'm too soft, I get no respect. And if I do act with more masculine, common traits, I get perceived as, we all know the word, but a nasty woman. But a man might be perceived as a boss rather than, just being rude, as a woman might be perceived. So there's so many complexities of this, so many things that you can exhaust yourself. Am I doing the right thing? Should I say this? Should I not say this? And all it is just be yourself, and you will naturally grow and evolve into the leader that you will be. You can take on, criticism, and positive criticism that would be, and really kind of make yourself the best version, but you don't have to become anyone else. You are fine as you are. So I think that's such an interesting point, and one I actually haven't heard before in all of these conversations I've had. So that is something I'm definitely going to take with me from this conversation. But yeah, how is everything going in terms of your hiring? Is there any, I guess, without going into too much detail again, is there anything that you found really helpful in the process, or anything that you could advise to kind of widen up your talent pool? And I know these talent pools are really small anyway, so there's only so much we can do, but is there anything that you've come across in the way that you found helped with hiring as a hiring manager yourself?
Yeah, so we have this role coming, looking for a network AI researcher, and doing basically what I talked about in the beginning of our conversation. In the past recruitment process, I did find sometimes women would show less confidence when they start to pitch themselves for this role. They would start to talk small, things like, I'm not so good in this area. Because I have that empathy, I think usually I would encourage them to talk more about their achievement. I would probably change a way to ask the questions. So rather than tell me about your work, I would say, tell me about your achievement. So that kind of guide them to talk more about the positive achievement they have got instead of being too modest.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. I think that is such a natural behavior, is to go, oh, I don't know everything about that. I'm not an expert in that, so I'm going to start with a negative. I don't know a lot about this, so I couldn't possibly say, when actually my knowledge of this is this area. I'm yet to learn about this. I am keen to learn. But almost you don't want to be called out, so you already start with things that you don't know, so no one asks you about them, just in case. But that's a really interesting thing, and it just shows as well what another piece of advice there that you've given is, don't be too modest. You've worked really hard for the experience you've got so far, so share it. You're in an interview. It's and if all time in your life an interview is not the time to be modest. so so you should just go for it. So I think that's super interesting too, and thank you for sharing that, because I think this knowledge shared for other hiring managers who may be struggling, actually that difference in asking a question, you're not completely changing the interview process, but it's just another way of potentially getting someone to open. As time happens and people progress, it's really important to have a really diverse leadership panel who can share different cultural experiences, different gender experiences, etc., because everyone has those kind of pieces of knowledge that otherwise we wouldn't know, and then we can gain an understanding. Because ultimately, Western culture is probably not going to change hugely. Asian culture is probably not going to change hugely either, so we've got to actually open our minds and increase our understanding of these different cultures, so that we can know, oh, actually this is just more of a cultural thing, so I'm going to ask a question about this that's slightly more direct, so that I can actually see how, where their expertise is, because otherwise I know that this person might not shout about their experience as much as maybe someone from London. I don't know. So I love all of this, and I think this has been just such a insightful conversation for me. I love when I hear stuff that I just wouldn't have thought about, because it just, even for me, it helps me, because when I speak to candidates, it just increases my understanding of their experience, and every experience will be different, but a cultural difference will be really important for me to know as well, and how I question and qualify candidates. So thank you for that. I really appreciate you sharing all of this. From what I can see in the industry, we've got many more diversity and inclusion experts joining, teams in companies, where they can actually go, oh, actually, if we change this on a job spec, or if we looked at this different area of how we interview, I know take-home tests, for example, has been such a big area of looking into, because if you're a mother of 3, doing a take-home test, actually you're busiest when you're at home, because you've got all your children to look after. So finding that time to do take-home tests, might it just be easier to integrate that into the interview, because then you can have a select piece of time. It's just all these different factors. I think that it's, hopefully what I'm seeing at the moment is there's major change going on, and of course, there's not going to tomorrow be thousands of women who join loads of tech teams, but I am seeing more and more women come through the ranks, and just people from, not only women, from lots of different backgrounds come through, and I think it's really exciting. So I feel like you're going to be very busy, as you keep progressing and keep doing really exciting things. I think you're going to be really busy, but I think you're going to be finding new things come up every day and new problems to solve. So yeah, thank you for actually sparing the time to speak to me, because I know you've probably got another thousands of things to do today. So it has been really great, and I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.